Remnant of Anthropos. Chapter 1. Green Terra Score. It was in the gall of defying ignorance that he sought the respite of solitude and nostalgic nepenthe of man discovering fire. What better choice than this tragic yet truthful void, occupying the frontier that reconciles the fragility of life with the appetite of impulse. His impudence reigned, for the most part, but his father's words naturally interrupted this routine meditation and, once again, roused him from an artificial slumber. Since the beginning of human history, we have been torn. His father's voice, vivid and without mercy, crushed the typical chords of fatalism and regret which too often possessed this frail creature. Many look to the ground, begging it to give us life, if not for just one more generation. But who is to say that the soil will continue to give after its first fruit has been presented? Hope has evolved. Man does not live by bread alone. The fruit of the earth is now ordered to give God's covenant to the universe. So, men with wisdom, my son, have looked to heaven. It is only by a higher order that the inferior may be authentically improved, crossing the chasm of becoming to being, from mud to man to heaven. Terran awoke too fast. Confidence stayed to slumber. "Call me Jonah," he said in unenthusiastic protest to the silent testimony of the priory surrounding him, while lifting his body from its interim repose into a slightly seated position. The settings on his stasis chamber were too responsive. Previous 4 attempts also failed to keep him under. Kept on being awoken by his dreams. The voice of his father. The life support systems were responding to the stress his mind was experiencing. Terran had been prepared for this, and through his religious vows was obliged to routinely awake for purposes of both ritual observance and routine maintenance. Even without this obligation, post-hibernation procedure would have to be completed. Terran would have to wait several weeks before he could meet the medical requirements to attempt another hibernation. They all knew the struggle that laid before them. Every naturally born human being was required to train in space, and those selected for a pilgrimage were well acclimated to high-pressure scenarios, microgravity environments, and long periods of isolation. For years, they would conduct drills and simulate every situation encountered by previous missions, as well as scenarios dreamed up by creatively sadistic minds. Over the course of these years, candidates and pilgrims honed the emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual fitness required to endure this crucible marking the bridge between generations. It's an old world offering itself to a new creation. Now he kept on thinking back to his time on Earth. After his father was given the charter to Tolan Centauri, everything changed. It was as if some mysterious force partially raised Terran from the dead and then tasked him to complete this miraculous resurrection with nothing more than his own inferiority. At the genesis to his mature life, he was eager to serve at the diocesan level and facilitate the supernatural connection between heaven and earth. In the beginning, he never really gave much thought to leaving it. In all honesty, it was a result of the endless qualms and lingering fatigue provoked by an extreme annoyance in his own pursuit of a perfect perspicuity that Terran sought the respite of solitude and the nepenthe of man discovering fire. In his brief exposure to public teaching, he found only an artificial luster, polished by an inauthentic exchange. Before his novitiate stage concluded, he sooner desired hermitship than public academia. Of course, deeper residual reasons for this abide beneath a veneer of legitimacy. On the surface, to all honest biology, there is a desire, no, of revelation, of the necessity to facilitate a continuity amongst the generations. Instinct. Instinct must be provoked. It must be threatened to be activated. The output is then shaped by the will and the intellect. One's ability to discern the reality that we are dealing with. He felt compelled to fulfill a destiny laid upon him by the great teachers of the past as he obsessively sought the asylum of every era but his own. Not to pry too closely or too critically to his private state of mind, but many of the entries in his personal log begin with, "If only I was born in the era of," and "in the time of our forging." It is, however, quite unfortunate when men like Terran fashion themselves into a Miniver chibi and overvalue any product of their own age, especially the past. He is now in the time of a people's forging. He is in the place of that forging, as transient as that place may be. But sadly, he does not understand the nature of his own mutiny against the universe around him. There is a reason, though it is elusive now, and yes, we are fortunate to profit from such mystery, but to our surprise, in every age it is most common to find a dull melancholy abundantly cultivated by times of authentic strife. Terran is still generally unaware of this. The dull melancholy he feels is part of the struggle. It's natural to any revolution. Strange times are those of insurrection. We have little choice but to ration real romance when confronted with a moment that stretches into an eternity. The average moment is exhausting enough, is it not? Let alone these moments that jostle every sense from a subconscious slumber. If he is bored now, he certainly would be the same in any age of man. Terran's problem is localized to himself. Neither the universe nor God, neither man nor beast, neither rock nor river is to blame for his incorrect analysis. Furthermore, beyond the false accusation of harboring a callous nature, every living day offers mercy through correction. All Terran has to do is labor with the attention to truth, as opposed to blaming every living day, which is what he likes to do best. Either way, what is most unfortunate, if he fails to observe the revolution within him, the inertia around him, if he fails to see the bondage to decay that the plethora of matter and life finds itself drowning within, then the panacea that comes only with a certain revelation of truth is inevitably delayed a further season. The growth of man stunted by another generation, hindering the birth of Lazarus. Either way, Terran is bored, restless, and randomly resentful. Terran is wrong. Though he is flawed, he is also a human, a mere creature collapsing into the potential of a random niche. And as some are creatures of habit, and some relate their body chemistry and its volume of water to lunar cycles. As man is a creature of habit, made nearly entirely of water, Terran was a creature composed mainly of nostalgia, mixed with an active current of radical religious observance. He was a poet. The small screen in front of him projected basic stats through an antique ambience. 40 weeks. New record, he muttered through hands that enveloped his face and fingers that massaged his eyes. Lacking any grace, these fingers began to lightly pull and tug Terran's long hair as if to draw out any last vestige of the fatigue that plagued his being. His mind stubbornly and slowly took to the dim light, and from there awoke the other senses. He felt the warm water and smelled the sterility emanating from the stasis chambers. The smell permeated through the dormitory during pre- and post-hibernation, but was quickly evacuated by the filtration system. The EKGs were the only noise to be heard. Tracing the heartbeat of the pilgrims stewarded under Terran's ministration to a new home. After 40 weeks of sleep, his mouth was parched. Stretching his neck and arms, he fended off flashes of regret and lost passions. In the flight of one moment, he decided to devote his life to the Sanctus Altus. He would often note those details and subtlety while recording his personal log or composing poetry. Terran's score in the symphony of human drama was a rare case. His father received this charter within weeks of Terran's impulse to join the Sanctus Altus. He was destined at an early stage of his religious vocation, the guarantee of a pilgrimage. Every moment was spent in preparation to leave. They knew what they had faced. They knew that while still on earth, you should relish and celebrate your time in the womb of our great mother, and be anxious only to give to your kin what she has given you, an identity. He was born and bred for this challenge, eager to ferry the champion of biology across the universe before him. He was eager to carry the identity of the saints that hosted our struggle through labor, war, disease, and injustice, and fulfilling the great monuments to math, science, and the arts. He was eager to animate himself in the eternal battle for the immortalization of biological selfhood. The neutralized environment cultivated in deep space is, after all, quite docile compared to the violence and the hostility of the early Earth, which our infant ancestors crawled out from. But following the primordial age and the reign of biology, it took only a few centuries, did it not? A few centuries of playing with stones and fire to emerge from the smoke lifted on the artificial wings of an ideological phoenix. And many would commonly assume that it is the technology satisfying our greatest need in this endeavor. It is, however, the rational mind drawing the most irrational conclusion. The only faculty in short supply in the continuity of life crossing the chasm between generations is the willingness to give one's own. Terran's people, though they have perfected the use of mechanical technology, exhausted every potential computer application, and fine-tuned various forms of propulsion, have invested very little in breaking the mold of the ancients, who pioneered this age of discovery. The Priory, a vast spinning ring-shaped structure that housed the inhabitants of this hibernating proto-civilization, was simple and circular in shape. With a centripetal constitution that propels any internal contents or passengers toward the outer barrier when spinning at the correct rate, it offers only the illusion of gravity. Terran's people labored for an order higher, as they saw it, and as they put it, they felt no need to recreate a force like gravity that predated a new struggle. Terran himself instructed various levels and age groups in this first lesson of a matured catechesis. Gravity has offered all it could. It's time for man's contribution. Positioned and docked in the center of the Priory is an elongated cylindrical command module. It's capped with a cone nose that extends naturally from its apex into a protracted body, and concluding the directrix at the stern with a multiple booster system. This mile or so long enclosure drives the vehicle using a rather simple form of antimatter propulsion while navigating along gravitational currents which encourage unimaginable velocities. Both of these structures, the Priory and the command module, are massive, and they encompass many miles of volume. The Priory and command module together were christened the Peregrine by Terran's father, Nahor. He has long since passed. It's his brother Ru that he is the designated patriarch of this vessel, but unable to join the pilgrimage due in part to his age, although this is in line with the custom set by most missions. The covenantal blessing was allocated to Terran's viceroyship and designed to be imparted to his nephew, Philetas, when the boy reaches a level of sacramental maturity and full communion. Though young, frail, and a bit pedantic, the boy's dedication to formality ensures a continuous transmission of human institutions. Such circumstances are not the most desirable, but became a necessity with the windows of opportunity for this pilgrimage dependent on the position of dozens of astronomical bodies within and outside of our solar system. They had no choice but to leave when they did. Terran's nephew has been arranged to be domesticated, but this cannot happen until a greater physical and spiritual maturity has been reached. Until that time, Terran holds the blessing of the fathers that came before him, and all of the authority accompanying patriarchal status. While the vehicle is propelled by antimatter, it is powered by atomic fusion. These supplies are maintained and stored in the command module along with the technical supplies and the automated systems needed to sustain space travel. The bridge stations are located within the coned nose, which provides secure and mobile seating by means of a robotic arm, which can position the pilot at their interface or anywhere in the vicinity of the bridge. Navigation and other stations function similarly. There were multiple interfaces, both fixed and projected holographically, and the cone is constructed mainly from transparent material. It was reinforced by a frame model of the same alloy as the body of the command module itself. Now, connected to the command module by four evenly spaced ladderways, the priory not only housed the pilgrims crossing the chasm between generations, but was reserved primarily to the preservation of the defining characteristics of human identity. It's a transient temple, a museum of every art, an academy of every science, ferrying the institutions of both biology and spirit across the chasm of becoming to being. His people avoided technological dependence. Machines may help us cope with our inferiority, but dependency on them suggests an ignorance to it, a reluctance to respect the unknown. Fear is a utility in the business of wonder and awe. Terran was breathing with a purposeful composure, his eyes now momentarily closed, persevering through the annoyance of an uninvited memory wrapped in unreachable passions. He recalled the wise man's words to every generation that harvest the hidden to cultivate what can be known. An utterly fearless man is a far more dangerous comrade than a coward. As the man who has no fear has no understanding of the universe he clumsily stumbles through. One thing that Terran had in abundance was fear. He feared success in his mission as much as he feared its failure. Man may be better off in blissful ignorance as compared to the pain that awaits him, you see. We'll take a page from Terran's own reflections on the challenge of space travel. If you were so aware of the misfortune that awaits you, you may not make the journey at all. But the profit to any toil worth our attention is for the generations, and nothing worth having comes easily. We stumble through a clumsy universe at the mercy of a vengeful God, careening through a universe rationalized by primitive senses. What the universe really looks like can be perceived only through the nightmares ignited by a subconscious perception of the looming threat that envelops our fragile selfhood. The universe is a dark place that the mind digests and illuminates only one small piece at a time. If the mind were to know the truth of the darkness around it, without first kindling a supernatural sense of hope, that is, it would surely be taken by it. Furthermore, the mind is keen to delusion in the course of life's inevitable failures, you see. So the supernatural hope we know calls us from beyond this dark void. It's no delusion, no, but the divine mystery which precedes all revelation. He slowly put his head back to study the high vaulted ceiling, which lacked the usual engravings found in most sections of the priory. Tracing with his eyes the rising cold metal bulkheads, evenly spaced, ribbed from floor to ceiling and designed to take on the subtle look of a stone pillar, Terran focused his vision. The bulkhead's natural color and honest shape, spherical triangles narrowly protruding from the inner hall, complemented the smoke-stained facade of the enclosing bulwark. It all came together to look more like the wall of a medieval monastery than a solid metal alloy separating frail passengers from an unforgiving vacuum. Terran lifted himself up from the warm waters of the stasis chamber. He prepared his ceremonial vestments and robes that waited next to him while he slept. The formal outfit, named after its creator, was referred to as the Auxterian attire and worn exclusively by members of the Sanctus Altus. Concluding the ritual, he slowly grasped with admiration the retractable bowstaff of his father. The blades were recessed into the baton mechanism, and the entire contraption then fastened to the inside of his vest. Looking to the right of his own stasis pod, he saw the face of his nephew Philotas, whose father was the patriarch of this proto-civilization. Or as Terran put it, this seed 4 billion years in the crafting womb of a static selfhood expressed through an ever-evolving biology caught in the collision of matter at the intersection of space and time. and all of this with no apparent escape from the fate of death. So let us begin, as Terran continually notes in his own log. Death or glory, the hymn of evolution.